Room 914. That's where champagne glasses clinked, ties loosened, and something I'll never forget began unraveling behind a hotel door that should have stayed shut. The gala had ended 2 hours earlier. Guests had trickled out of the ballroom, buzzed, flirtatious, unbuttoned. Faint music still echoed through the gilded hallways, and security had dwindled to one sleepy guard by the elevators. I was upstairs, 5 doors down, kneeling on the carpet outside our room, fishing my phone from a jacket I had no business wearing. I wasn't supposed to be alone. I had told me to grab her charger from the room, said she'd meet me shortly after finishing a quick chat with Fletcher about next quarter's metrics. I didn't even know what that meant, but I nodded like a loyal dog and walked away. Room 914 was quiet when I returned. Dark. Hadn't I left the lights on? At first I thought maybe housekeeping had come through, or someone had accidentally switched our room. Then I heard it, a voice. Not loud, not moaning, just low. A man's voice, confident, unhurried. And then her laugh, her laugh. I'd know that sound even if the world went silent. But it wasn't the laugh she gave me at breakfast. It was a version of her I hadn't seen in months, maybe years, breaking through the walls I'd been patching up with denial and cheap wine. I didn't knock. I didn't burst in. I just listened. 30 seconds. That's all I gave myself. 30 seconds to stand there, heart pounding in my ears, mouth dry, knowing something irreversible was unfolding 5 feet from me. Her voice floated through the crack under the door, flirtatious, unapologetic. She sounded alive, and I was stone. Then, footsteps. Closer. Fast. I panicked, backing away, hiding near the ice machine. The door opened. Hai stepped into the hallway, hair messy, phone in hand, adjusting her dress like she just changed clothes. She didn't see me at first, not until I stepped out and said her name. Her whole body jerked, like she'd seen a ghost. She dropped the phone. "Ellis?" she gasped. I thought you were still downstairs." Her words stumbled. I didn't ask questions, I just looked at her. And she did the one thing I never expected. She reached for me, tears already welling, lips moving silently. She reached out like she was something she suddenly remembered she wanted. And I leaned forward, close enough for only her to hear. "Not after that." Her hand froze midair. I didn't wait for excuses. I didn't want an explanation dressed up as regret. I walked away, down the stairs, out of the hotel, out of whatever spell I'd been under for far too long. And I still don't know if she stayed in that hallway crying or went back inside and closed the door behind her. All I know is room 914 stayed quiet behind me, but everything in me was screaming. I didn't go home. I didn't even think about going home. I just wandered into the hotel lobby like a ghost, unsure where my feet were taking me. The room was full of laughter, clinking glasses, people too caught up in their own self-importance to notice a man unraveling in plain sight. Somehow that was comforting. I stood near the bar, ordered a soda water with lime so I wouldn't look completely out of place, and stared at the marble floor while trying to keep my hands from shaking. People passed by, nodded, smiled. One guy from Hai's department, I think his name was Micah, clapped me on the back and said something like, "Killer turnout tonight, huh?" I nodded. Couldn't even form words. I could still hear her voice from that hallway. I could still smell her perfume mixed with someone else's cologne. It made my throat burn. I didn't want to imagine what had happened behind that door, but my mind was already doing the work, filling in blanks, adding shadows, stitching together a scene I wasn't supposed to witness. But I had heard just enough. I sat down in one of the oversized chairs by the fireplace, the kind meant for posing, not comfort, and tried to breathe normally. A woman with a name tag reading Kelly, Operations, plopped down beside me, kicked off her heels, and started talking about how exhausting these events were. I nodded, like I was listening. She mentioned something about the open bar and someone making out in a supply closet. I smiled, or at least I think I did. My body was still moving, still pretending to be human, but my head was a mile above the room, floating somewhere between fury and humiliation. I stared at my wedding ring. It suddenly looked foreign, heavy, like it belonged to someone else. I tried twisting it off, but my fingers had swollen from the heat of the room or maybe from the shock. It wouldn't budge. Then I saw her again. Hai had come back downstairs, alone. She scanned the room like she was trying to spot me across a battlefield. When her eyes landed on me, I expected her to hesitate, to slink away. But no, she walked straight towards me with that expression she always used when she wanted to pretend nothing had happened. Calm, steady, like she'd just blown up everything we were. "Ellis?" she said softly as she reached me. "Can we talk?" I didn't stand. I didn't move. I just looked up at her with what I imagined were the emptiest eyes I've ever had. "I think we already did," I said. She crouched next to the chair, lowering her voice like we were just another couple at a party, not two people standing at the edge of a crumbling cliff. "It's not what it looked like," she said. And I almost laughed. I didn't, but I almost did. I leaned a little closer, like I was letting her in on a secret. "Tell me, Hai, what did it look like? Because from where I was standing, it looked like you brought him back to our room." She flinched, just slightly. But I saw it. She dropped a daze, bit her lip. "I wasn't thinking straight. I had too much to drink."
"You followed me up," I repeated. The words came out sharper than I intended. "You just happened to take the elevator to our floor, into our room." She didn't answer, just stood there, holding her arms like she was cold. She looked nothing like the woman who used to fall asleep on my chest, whispering stories about the future. She looked small, scrambled, guilty, or maybe just caught. "Please don't do this here," she whispered, glancing at the people nearby. "Right," I said, standing up, "because it would be embarrassing if anyone knew." She reached out again. Her fingers brushed my wrist, that tiny, habitual gesture that used to mean everything. I pulled away. "I already told you, Hai, not after that." And I walked past her, this time not toward the exit, but toward the elevator. Not back to room 914, just somewhere else, anywhere else. I didn't know what I'd do next. I didn't know where I'd sleep. I didn't know how to tell my parents, or what I'd say to her sister, who always said we were relationship goals. But I did know one thing. Whatever this was, it was no longer us. And I think she finally realized that too, as I disappeared into the elevator and left her behind in the ballroom that was now way too bright, way too loud, and full of people who had no idea what had just died on that floor. I ended up in room 910, not because it was mine, not because anyone invited me, but because the door was propped open just enough that I could hear muffled music, laughter, and someone saying, "He's probably not coming back anyway." It was one of those casual after parties that always form at these corporate events. Junior staff with loosened ties, heels in hand, crowded around a minibar pretending none of it mattered. I walked in like I belonged, took a soda from the table without asking, and sat in the corner where the light didn't quite reach. Nobody asked who I was. They were too busy talking about sales targets and some embarrassing karaoke moment from earlier. But I kept one ear open, not for gossip, for her voice. I kept expecting Hai to show up at the door, pretending everything was okay, laughing too loud to prove some invisible point. She didn't, not yet. Instead, I watched people move around like nothing had shifted. I wanted to scream that the ground had split open upstairs, that someone was tearing a marriage apart one whisper at a time. But I stayed silent. That's what I do. That's who I've always been. After 20 minutes, I slipped out and made my way to the end of the hallway. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was punishing myself. Or maybe I needed to see if she'd gone back. Room 914 was dark, quiet. I stood there, staring at the door, hand hovering near the handle, even though I didn't have the key card anymore. I didn't need to go inside. I already knew what had happened there. I could feel it, smell it. Even the faint trace of perfume still hanging in the corridor. Hers. His. I started walking away. But then, I heard it. Laughter. A voice I recognized. Not hers. His. Fletcher. He was in 916, 2 doors down. The voice was unmistakable, smooth, arrogant, filled with that casual confidence I'd never been able to fake. He was talking to someone on the phone, loud enough that I could catch every fourth word through the paper-thin wall. I pressed closer, not proud of it, but something in me needed confirmation. Needed something real to hold on to besides the echo in my chest. He said, "She'll come around. She always does." Pause. No, he'd have done the same. Guy looked like a kicked puppy. Another pause. She's probably crying about it now, but give her a week, tops. I don't remember walking away. I don't remember reaching the stairwell, but I do remember gripping the rail so tight my knuckles went white. My body was on fire. Shame, rage, all of it blurring together until my knees nearly gave out. I sat on the cold stairwell floor and stared at the emergency exit sign like it might tell me what to do next. She'll come around. She always does. That wasn't just arrogance. That was familiarity. That wasn't a one-time mistake. That was a pattern, a dance they'd done before, which meant I hadn't just stumbled onto a moment of weakness. I'd walked into a chapter that had already been written while they were planning to keep writing without me. I thought about our house, the framed photo in the hallway from our trip to Mendocino, the coffee mug she bought with Ellis and Hi on it, the plants I watered every morning while she scrolled her phone in silence. It was all fake. Or maybe it had just been dead for a long time and I was the only one still performing CPR. My phone buzzed. Her name. I didn't answer. I couldn't. She texted, "Please come back. We need to talk." I stared at it until the screen went dark. And for the first time that night, I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly, bitterly, because I wasn't sure what hurt more, what she did, or how easily she thought I'd come back after it. It was sometime after 1 a.m. when I finally stood up from that stairwell. My legs had gone numb. My shirt clung to my back with stale sweat. My tie was still around my neck, like some stupid symbol of who I thought I was supposed to be. That night, it felt more like a leash I hadn't noticed tightening until now. I didn't know where I was going, but I walked, not back to the lobby, not to room 914. I walked out through the service exit, past 2 hotel workers on a smoke break who didn't even look up, into the parking garage. I found a quiet spot between 2 pillars and sat on the cold cement floor like a man trying to disappear. My phone buzzed again. Her name. "Ellis, please, I need to explain. Just come upstairs." 5 minutes later, "I'm in the room alone. I swear. Please just talk to me." Then the third, "It wasn't what it looked like." That line broke something in me. Because if there's one thing I know, it exactly was what it looked like. And she knew it. But she was still trying to paint over it, make it sound like I had misinterpreted her welcoming another man into our room, into our marriage, into whatever was left of my dignity. I went back in. Not because I believed her, I didn't, but because I needed to look her in the eyes and see how far she'd go to lie to me. I needed to understand just how much of our life she was willing to burn down and still try to convince me the house was still standing. I swiped my card at the front desk, told them I was locked out. They gave me a spare with barely a glance. And when I opened the door to 914, she was sitting at the edge of the bed, barefoot, hair down, eyes red from crying, or pretending to cry. I couldn't tell anymore. The room smelled like stale wine and a mistake that couldn't be taken back. She stood up fast when she saw me. "Ellis! Thank God!" I held up a hand. "Don't. Just sit down." She hesitated, then obeyed. For a second, there was silence. The kind that's thick with everything you'll never be able to unsay. "I need you to be honest. You owe me at least that." She nodded, darting like a child caught in a lie. "Did he touch you?"
Yes, she said quickly, then added, "But was it the first time?" She paused, and that pause screamed louder than any confession. My breath caught. I stared at her like I didn't know who she was. And maybe I didn't. Maybe the woman I married was already long gone, and this was just her replacement, rehearsing lines she didn't believe in anymore. "I made a mistake," she said. "It got out of hand. He's been persistent. I didn't know how to shut it down. And tonight, I'd had too much to drink. I wasn't thinking straight. He followed me up here. I didn't plan it." "You brought him here," I interrupted. "This room. You brought him to our room, and you expect me to believe you didn't plan anything?" "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Hi?" I snapped, my voice louder than I meant it to be. Because from the hallway, it sounded like two people who weren't strangers, who weren't having their first mistake, who had a rhythm. She started crying then, the real kind, I think. The one that comes when the story you've built starts falling apart in your hands, and you realize the only thing left to do is beg. "Please," she whispered, "don't throw everything away over this." That line hit me in a way I didn't expect. I was throwing everything away? I took a step back and let the weight of those words settle in my gut. "I didn't throw anything," I said quietly. "I spent the last year trying to hold us together while you were out building something else. I gave you room to breathe. I gave you every benefit of the doubt. I stood next to you at every party while you floated toward other rooms, other people, other lives. You want to talk about what's being thrown away? You already lit the match high. I'm just stepping back before the flames take me too." She covered her mouth like she was about to scream, but nothing came out. I turned toward the door, grabbing my bag from the corner. "I'm going to stay with my brother for a while," I said. "You'll get a call from a lawyer. And when that happens, don't lie to them. Tell them what you told me, that it wasn't what it looked like." I walked out before she could answer. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say goodbye. I just left. And for the first time in years, it felt like I was finally walking away from something that was never mine to hold. The drive to my brother's place was nearly silent, except for the low hum of tires against wet asphalt. It had started to drizzle by the time I reached the interstate. The sound of the rain on the windshield felt like more of a lullaby for the dead part of me I hadn't quite buried yet. I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't anything. I just drove, staring at the taillights ahead like they might lead me somewhere that didn't feel like failure. Grant lives 35 minutes outside the city, in a modest split-level house with his wife and their 2-year-old son. He's the kind of guy who doesn't need much to be happy. A backyard, a fridge full of leftovers, and a recliner that permanently smells like popcorn and baby wipes. He opened the door in a ratty hoodie, blurry-eyed and confused, holding a spoon like he thought I was a burglar. "Ellis, it's almost 2 a.m., man. Are you okay?" I shook my head, and something about that small movement made my lips start to tremble. "She cheated," I managed to say. He didn't ask questions. He just pulled me inside, locked the door, and poured me a drink without even looking back. That night, I barely slept on the couch, curled under a blanket that still smelled like his dog, listening to the baby monitor crackle from the other room. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what our first kiss felt like. Not because I missed it, but because I couldn't feel anything tied to her without bitterness seeping through the edges. By morning, I had 9 unread texts from Hi and 2 missed calls. I didn't open them. I forwarded everything to a separate folder titled Legal and turned off notifications. Later that day, while Grant's wife took the baby to her mother's, I finally told him everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told him about Fletcher, the hotel room, the lies, the phone call I overheard 2 doors down. He didn't say much at first, just listened with that quiet intensity only older brothers seem to master. When I finished, he stood up, grabbed the remote, and muted the game he'd been pretending to watch. "You need to understand something," he said. "This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some drunken accident. This was a choice, repeated, deliberate. And whatever part of you still wants to fix it, you need to kill that now." I nodded, but his words didn't hit until much later, because part of me, the stupid, broken part, still wondered if I could have done more, if I'd loved her better, complimented her more, been more adventurous in bed. Had I made it too easy for someone like Fletcher to find the cracks? That night, I got an email. Subject line, "You don't know the full story." It was from a woman named Kira. No last name, just a long paragraph that started with, "I don't know if you remember me. We met once at last year's winter formal. I'm on the same team as Hi. I wasn't going to say anything, but I can't watch this happen anymore and stay quiet." I read every word like it was evidence at a trial I didn't ask to be a part of. Kira went on to describe how Fletcher and Hi had been flirtatious since before she even joined the firm. How they'd left conferences together, how everyone noticed, even joked about it behind their backs, but no one ever confronted it. Because, and this part stuck with me, she always looked like she got away with things. I sat back in my chair and let the weight of those words settle in my gut. Got away with things. Had I enabled that? Had I spent years building her a runway with my silence and support so she could take off into someone else's arms? I replied to Kira only once. "Thank you for telling me the truth. I wish it had come sooner." And I meant it. Later that evening, Grant and I sat in the backyard with beers in hand, watching the sun bleed out behind the trees. He asked what I was going to do next. I didn't answer immediately. Eventually, I said, "I think I need to start by remembering who I was before her."
And even saying that out loud felt like something inside me had finally shifted, because maybe I'd been so wrapped up in saving the marriage, in proving I was enough, that I forgot I already was, before she ever learned how to weaponize my patience. But I also knew something else. Hi wasn't done. She'd come back. She'd spin her own version. She'd try to write her way back into the story, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go to erase what really happened. 3 days passed without a word from me, but Hi didn't stop. She shifted tactics. Her texts changed tone, from desperate to measured, then from pleading to composed. And then suddenly, like she'd been coached, her messages read more like a script. Clean, controlled, sanitized. She wanted to meet, just to talk. She said she wanted to understand how I was feeling. Said she wasn't ready to give up on us. That last one almost made me laugh out loud. Give up? As if it was still hers to hold on to. As if she hadn't already handed it over in a hotel room. A fire of betrayal. Then, on Thursday, I got a call from my mom. Not unusual, but the second I answered, I could tell something was off. Her voice was tight, nervous. She danced around the topic for a full minute before she finally said, "I saw Hi today at the market." I froze. "What?" "She came up to me, Ellis. Said she was trying to respect your space, but that she's worried. She said you've been staying with Grant, and that she hasn't been able to reach you, that she's sorry." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind was already racing, trying to figure out what her angle was. "She cried, Ellis," my mom said. Said it was a misunderstanding, that she needs a chance to explain. I told her it wasn't my place, but, well, she seemed really broken. I swallowed hard. She wasn't crying when she opened that hotel door. There was a long pause on the line. Then my mom whispered, "Is it true?" "Yes." I could hear the wind shift on her end. Her breath caught. My mother has always loved Hai, defended her, treated her like a second daughter. So much so that I think, in some twisted way, Hai counted on that, knew how to weaponize the image she'd spent years crafting. It wasn't just me she betrayed, it was the whole illusion. Later that afternoon, I found out she'd also texted Grant's wife, Rowan, told her she'd been ambushed at the event, claimed Fletcher had manipulated the situation, that I'd walked in during a heated conversation and made assumptions. She even said she'd been trying to end things that night, that she hadn't meant for it to go that far. She was rewriting the story, and she wasn't just telling it to strangers. She was planting it in the ears of people close to me, reshaping the edges, painting herself as confused, heartbroken, even loyal, if you can believe that, like I'd walked on her for something minor. But I wasn't shocked. Hai has a way of shifting blame without ever raising her voice. She never lies directly, just bends truth until it collapses. And what scared me most was that it worked. People listened. People nodded. That night, I decided to meet her, not because I needed closure, but because I needed to see what version of herself she was bringing to the stage now. We met in a neutral place, a small public park near the river. Early evening. Barely anyone around. She wore a denim jacket over a dress I hadn't seen before, which somehow offended me, that she had the energy to shop, to pick something new to wear for this, like it was a date. She walked up like we were still something, like I was just being moody, and all it would take was the right words to untangle the mess. "Thanks for coming," she said gently. I said nothing. She looked tired, eyes puffy, but there was something calculated beneath it, like she'd practiced this conversation in the mirror 100 times. "I know things look bad, but you walked in at the worst possible moment. I wasn't thinking clearly, I had drinks, I didn't want to hurt you." I finally spoke. "Then why are you telling everyone you were ambushed? That he manipulated you? That I imagined things?" Her face faltered just slightly. She blinked. "I didn't mean it like that. I was trying to explain my side. No, you're trying to keep the version of you that everyone still likes, but that version doesn't exist anymore." She stepped forward. "Alice, please, we've been through worse." "No," I said again. "We've been through hard times. Not betrayal, not this." I could see it then, her frustration breaking through the softness. The guilt was gone. She'd switched again. "You don't have to blow up everything over one mistake," she said, voice sharpening. "People survive worse. You're not even trying." That's when I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was all so painfully, stupidly familiar. The gaslighting, the rewriting, the attempt to frame my reaction as the problem instead of her actions. "I tried," I said, "for years. I tried when you stopped looking at me at dinner. I tried when you started locking your phone and sleeping on the far edge of the bed. I tried when you made me feel like a roommate, and I still stayed because I believed you were worth it, that we were worth it." I took a breath. But now I know better. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, stunned, arms limp at her sides, as I turned my back and walked away. This time for real. She didn't follow. And I didn't look back, because some stories don't deserve sequels. It was almost comical how quiet my life became after that conversation in the park. Not peaceful, not by a long shot, but eerily still, like the world was holding its breath waiting to see what I do next. Hai didn't reach out for 2 full days after I walked away. No texts, no calls, not even a passive-aggressive quote posted to her story.
For someone who once messaged me from the hallway if I took too long at the grocery store, the silence was deafening. But I knew her too well to think it was surrender. It was strategy, the quiet before her next move. And she didn't disappoint. On the third day, she sent an email. Subject line, "Please read. It's important."
That phrase alone made my stomach tighten, because Hi never sent emails. If it wasn't spoken or texted, it didn't happen. So I knew, before even opening it, that this was her last shot, her final attempt to twist the story into something she could live with. I clicked. It wasn't a confession. Of course it wasn't. It was a document, a neatly crafted, bulleted summary of our situation. No emotion, just the illusion of structure. She had organized it like a project recap, outlining what happened, her perception, my reaction, and then, unbelievably, potential next steps. Under what happened, she wrote, "An inappropriate but brief exchange occurred between myself and a colleague, which Ellis misinterpreted under emotionally heightened circumstances." Under her perception, I have been under significant workplace stress and unfortunately allowed blurred boundaries to form with someone I should have kept professional distance from. And under my reaction, Ellis made a unilateral decision to vacate our shared space and cut off communication without full discussion of the incident. Then came next steps, options like this was a business merger, counseling, temporary separation with communication plan, mediation with trusted family support. I read it 3 times, unable to decide if I was more insulted or baffled. There was no mention of remorse, no raw acknowledgement, no, "I broke your heart and shattered our trust and I don't deserve your forgiveness." Just a PDF-style cover-up. She didn't want to fix us. She wanted to fix the optics, to manage the fallout, like it was a crisis at her job, an HR incident to be contained and resolved before Q3. And that's when it hit me. I had married a PR campaign. I didn't reply, but I printed the email and handed it to my lawyer, because if she was drawing lines and legalities, I'd make sure the next line was the signature on our divorce papers. Later that week, I got a call from her sister, Brenna, someone who had always been more honest with me than Hi ever was. She sounded tired, nervous. She told Mom that you were having a breakdown, that you imagined the whole thing, that you thought she was cheating but that you had no proof. I didn't even respond. I just laughed, that tight, bitter laugh that tastes like blood. "She's spiraling, Alice. She's not handling this. She's making things up, and I just needed you to know I don't believe her." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. But I also realized something terrifying in that moment. Hi wasn't just rewriting the story for her sake. She was building a shield, a narrative she could hand anyone who asked. Because to her, shame was always worse than guilt. If she could convince enough people that I was unstable, dramatic, overreacting, she wouldn't have to carry the weight of what she did. Then came the letter. A real one. In an envelope, delivered to Grant's house by courier. I recognized her handwriting immediately. I almost didn't open it. I stood by the mailbox for 5 full minutes, debating whether to just light it on fire and walk away. But curiosity, or maybe closure, won. Inside was 2 pages of emotional gymnastics. No header, no greeting, just her voice pouring out like a diary entry written for an audience. She talked about how our love deserved more than a single night to define it, how I had always been too quick to retreat when things got hard, how Fletcher was a symptom, not a cause. And then, the most damning line. If you had paid more attention to me, instead of playing the victim, maybe I wouldn't have had to find validation somewhere else. That was it. That was the sentence that turned whatever fragile thread of forgiveness I still had into ash.
because it wasn't just a confession, it was a weapon. A final desperate effort to convince me that this wasn't betrayal, it was punishment, that I had driven her to it. I folded the letter slowly, placed it back in the envelope, slid it into the trash. That night, I wrote my own letter. Not to her, but to myself. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't long. It was just a promise. Never again will I apologize for being broken by someone who was already cracked. Then I turned off my phone, closed the curtains, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like someone who had finally let go. The weeks that followed weren't magical. There was no grand epiphany, no soaring music, no everything happens for a reason. There was just silence. Strange, unrecognizable silence. And for a while, it was the hardest thing in the world. Waking up and not checking my phone, not listening for her footsteps, not feeling the weight of her presence in every room, every object, every routine I used to share with someone I thought I knew. The silence made me confront everything I'd ignored. And eventually, it made space for something I didn't expect. Peace. Not immediately, not completely, but enough. The divorce was clean. Faster than I expected, actually. I think deep down even Hai knew she couldn't rebuild what she burned down with a smirk and a spreadsheet. Once her attempts to rewrite the story collapsed under their own contradictions, she went quiet. The last time I saw her was outside the courthouse. She nodded at me, like we were strangers passing on a train platform, and maybe that's all we ever really were. The real shift didn't come from leaving her. It came from rediscovering myself. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Not dramatic things. I didn't run a marathon or go skydiving, but small, human things. I made my own breakfast again, and not just toast. I read real books, not just headlines. I walked without my phone, watched sunsets without needing to take pictures of them. I even got a dog, a rescue mutt named Jasper, with crooked ears and no sense of personal space. He sleeps beside me now, snoring like an old man, and for once, the sound doesn't make me feel alone. And then, last month, something happened that I never would have predicted. I met someone. Her name's Marin. She's not flashy, not someone who commands attention when she walks into a room, but she sees people. She listens. The first time we talked, it wasn't about jobs or exes or trauma. It was about lemon bars. She was buying the last one at the bakery I'd been frequenting on weekends. I made some sarcastic comment about her having excellent taste. She offered me half, just like that. We sat outside under a crooked umbrella and split it like two kids on a playground. I didn't tell her my story, not yet. She didn't ask. She just smiled, the way people do when they're not trying to impress anyone. And I swear, I hadn't seen a smile like that in years. We've gone on a few dates since then. Nothing too serious, no big declarations. But it feels easy. Honest. Like maybe this chapter won't be built on silence or suspicion. Like maybe love isn't supposed to feel like something you constantly have to rescue. I've learned that betrayal doesn't define you unless you let it. That people will lie, rewrite, manipulate. But truth has a way of waiting patiently. And when you're finally ready to stop surviving and start living, it's still there. Like a doorway you always knew existed but forgot how to find. So here I am, months later, in a home that's small but mine, with no lies under the floorboards and no unanswered questions in the dark. I'm still healing, still learning how to trust again, especially myself. But when I think back to that night, to her reaching for me on the dance floor, trying to reel me back into a story I didn't want to read anymore, I remember the words I whispered. Not after that. And I'm proud of them. Because that night, for the first time in a long time, I finally chose me. And this time, I'm not letting go.